What is up, everybody? Mr. Purtis here. Welcome to take 2 of our Form and Reaction, which is in Unit 5, Part 3A, 1750 to 1900. Last part, we talked about China and the Ottoman Empire. In this one, same theme, but with Russia and Japan. And just if you're rewatching this at some point and you didn't watch the first part or take 1, this is all about how other countries around the world outside of Western Europe and the United States are attempting to kind of modernize themselves as these other places have gone through the Industrial Revolution. So we're not industrialized. What do we do? Oh my goodness. So here's what we got. So I want to start with Japan review. The first thing is we have the Tokugawa shogunate, which is in power from 1450 to 1750. Remember, this is the previous time period, a little review here. And the shogunate is an old feudal system in which we have the Tokugawa family, which is in control. There is an emperor in charge or an emperor who's in power, but that emperor has almost no responsibilities, and the shogun really is the one running things. There are daimyos, which are nobles, the samurais who work for the nobles, farmers, artisans, peasants down here at the bottom. We have a lot of this land and loyalty, land for loyalty. We have this just entire feudal system in place. Also, in 1600, the Tokugawa shogunate has isolated themselves. They've seen these European merchants coming in and they've decided to isolate themselves. They only allow Dutch merchants in, and those Dutch merchants are very much isolated within Japan and where they can travel to. But for the most part, we have this society that's really kind of closed themselves off. So while this age of exploration is going on, and then by 1750, while the Industrial Revolution is going on, Japan, for the most part, is not experiencing any of it. They've closed themselves off to Europeans. Now, they are trading with China and Korea and Southeast Asia, but they're really kind of isolating themselves. So there's a couple problems that Japan is going to face in 1800s, and this should be this idea is kind of similar throughout. The United States is going to come to Japan, and this guy is Commodore Matthew Perry. This is his Japanese picture. This is his real photograph. He's a United States Commodore. He is in the United States Navy. He is sent by the U.S. government to Japan, and he basically comes with a fleet of ships and tells Japan, open up your ports, let us in and let us trade with you. And Japan says, we're not sure, come back in a little while and we'll tell you. So he comes back a couple months later with more ships, and he's like, what's your answer? And Japan, having known what's just happened in China with the Opium Wars, realizes that they don't have much choice but to open up their ports. So they decide to open up their ports to the United States. But this leaves them with an important dilemma. What do we do? If we allow Europeans and the United States to flood into our country, we can pretty much become dominated and taken over. How do we kind of reform ourselves? And this is kind of the theme. How do we reform ourselves in our country to make sure this doesn't happen? What the Japanese do is the samurais and some of the daimyos, which are upper nobles, decide to overthrow the Tokugawa family, this shogunate, which has been in power for over 250 years. They create a new government, which they refer to as the Meiji Era. The Meiji refers to the emperor, and Meiji just means enlightened one. And they bring back the emperor and give the emperor some power. And the samurais are going to overthrow this government with the focus on industrializing. So the focus becomes, we're going to sponsor the government, the state is going to sponsor industrialization. And we're going to try and industrialize our country so we can actually compete with and be on equal footing with the Western Europeans in the United States. So what their goal is they're going to build factories, they're going to build railroads, and we're going to bring in Westerners to update our military. It's very similar to what we talked about in the Ottoman Empire, where we're going to bring in these Westerners intentionally to update our military. We're also going to sponsor trips for our students, our college students. The government's going to sponsor these trips to go to Europe, to go to the United States in an attempt to learn from the Western Europeans in the United States. Then they will come back with these ideas of what they learned there, and then they can utilize those ideas and help industrialize our country. This is a board game that was actually played by kids in Japan. I don't know how popular it was, but you essentially would start here in Japan and you would travel around to different European, here's the United States, you travel around to different countries around Europe, and then in the end, you'd come back to Japan and you'd provide ideas. I don't know how popular it was, I don't know how fun it was, but you'd literally travel around the world, learn ideas, and then come back to Japan and win the game. Anyway, so this happens, and the reaction or what occurs as a result of this is a total success. Again, different than all of the other 3 countries that we talk about. Japan does industrialize. It's a complete success. But here's the deal with Japan. Japan lacks natural resources. And this is going to be a theme throughout the rest of this course. Remember always that Japan lacks resources to industrialize. So if they want to fully industrialize, if they want to be strong, they need to go out and conquer other countries. And one thing Japan is going to do is they are going to go out and start conquering other places in the late 1800s, early 1900s in order to gather and gain these resources. So they're going to fight a war against China, against Russia and Korea, and they're relatively successful in all of these cases. This is the Japanese person. This is a Russian cartoon, by the way, so it's drawn a little stereotypical. This is a Japanese person. They are bringing this person with the Q, and if you remember from the last video, this would be a Chinese person. They are stomping on Korea because they've just taken it over, and you have the Russian person kind of overlooking here, wondering what's going to happen next, and the Japanese person is going to invade. So Japan successfully industrialized from the Meiji Restoration, and they're going to go out and conquer because they lack natural resources. Don't forget that key. Also, we have Russia. So while we're talking about Russia, here's the deal with Russia. Going back to the previous time period, Mongol rule is ended in 1480. They start centralizing their government under a czar, and the family is named the Romanov family, and the czar is the government official and the religious leader. This is Peter the Great down here. Also, Russia is expanding. They're actually they're behind the Western Europeans in terms of the age of exploration. So what they're really going out and expanding for is they're looking for warm water ports. They're looking for ports where they can drop their boats in and start trading with ships. So you'll see this huge expansion of Russia. They gain all of this land in the 1600s and the early 1700s. So they're trying to expand. That's where Russia is in 1750, but they're behind. Russia is always behind because of this Mongol invasion in the 1300s. So here's the problem that they're facing in the 1800s. They have an old school system. Again, they're behind. Their economy is backwards. Most Russians in the whole entire country were serfs. In 1800. They're bound to the land by the nobles. It's a backwards economy. You don't have this surplus of workers. Remember, you need people to work in factories if you want to industrialize, and you have all of these serfs who can't leave their land without permission from their noble, and the noble doesn't want to let them leave because the noble needs farmers. So we have this huge issue where these serfs are bound to the land. We don't have these urban areas where we can industrialize. Two, it's still an absolute monarchy. Europe has gone through this period of revolutions where the monarchs almost have no power or relinquish power. They still have an absolute monarchy. The people in Russia are aware of the revolutions in Europe and the Americas. They're not totally isolated. They know what's going on. Also, the Russians have lost the Crimean War. They've lost land to the Ottoman Empire. And this is Crimea. This is present day map in the Ukraine. This region of the world has come up over the past couple of years as Russia has attempted to invade Crimea and take this land from the Ukraine. It's an important trade area. They lose this piece of land to the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman Empire is on the decline, and Russia loses this. So it's really embarrassing. So if you are Russia, you realize that you are behind. You need to industrialize. You need to reform your country. This is a theme here. So what they're going to do is they're going to emancipate the serfs. They're going to emancipation means freedom. They're going to free the serfs. The problem is that when they free the serfs, the nobles are like, whoa, you can't just free these people. We're the wealthy class. We've had these serfs forever. You can't just let them leave the the That would be ridiculous. So the czar decides to force the serfs to buy their freedom or buy the land from the noble. Now, the serfs are poor, so many of the serfs can't afford to do it, which leads to an issue where many serfs, even though they have the ability to gain their freedom, can't afford to get their freedom. So we have all of these people still banned to the land even after emancipation. Number two, some Enlightenment ideas are going to come into the country, but kind of similar to the Tanzimat reforms, they are going to be canceled. One czar comes in and he likes it, and then the grandson of that czar comes in and hates the reforms and wants to bring back his absolute power, so he cancels it. For example, you get a little taste of trial by jury and less censorship, and then it all gets canceled. One thing that the government does do, similar to Japan, is that they have state-sponsored industrialization. The government is going to build, the government, not private investors, not capitalism, more the government is going to sponsor and promote the building of factories. And they also build this Trans-Siberian Railroad. And this is the line of the Trans-Siberian Railroad. It is a 5,000-mile railroad track that links the coal and iron, which is found in this region of the world right here and over here, with the urban centers here in Eastern Europe, Moscow, St. Petersburg. So this huge track of railroad that is going to connect this is almost 12 time zones together into one. 5,000 miles by comparison, New York to California, we're looking at about 3,000 miles. So almost there and back in 1890s. Here's the issue, though, and here's what we face. The nobles and the peasants don't like industrialization. They like their old way of life, and they don't want to industrialize. So we have a backlash against, 85% of the population. We do have some peasants who are former serfs who do move to the cities, who are encouraged by going to the factories, finding new jobs, working in urban areas. But what they end up finding is long hours and poor conditions. And this is not a huge percentage of the population. Russia does not successfully industrialize. So we're talking 3% of the population, as opposed to in Western Europe where you might have 60, 70% of the population in urban areas. So we have poor conditions and long hours. So these peasants are going to be frustrated and angry. Because the government doesn't solve these problems, they don't pass new laws for working conditions and better hours like we see in Western Europe. So many people in Russia start turning, not many, but the small group of people who are being treated poorly in the factories are going to turn to Marxism and communism. So we're going to see people turning to this theory that came out of Europe of where the workers should overthrow the owners and treat everyone equal. And the main communist group in Russia is going to be called the Bolsheviks. This is Vladimir Lenin. He is the leader of the Bolsheviks. This is going to be their symbol. It is the hammer, which symbolizes workers, and the sickle, which symbolizes peasants, coming together. This group, don't tell anybody, is going to lead a revolution in Russia in the next time period. So when we talk about it in the next time period, you can come back to this for some synthesis if you need some. So that's where Russia is. They are not industrialized. It's totally unsuccessful. They have problems with peasants who move to the city, who are angry because of their working conditions. We have nobles who are upset. We have a lot of issues going on in this country, which is going to lead to a couple of revolutions in Russia, which is not good. So that's what we got. As always, any questions, write it down. Thanks. Have a good day.